So I received an email, and I've got this ongoing conversation with a husband and wife pair who are discussing long-term plans and life plans. And this most recent iteration, I thought it'd be much faster for me to just do a quick video. I've noticed that when specific people have questions, this is something I picked up as a classroom instructor. If one person has a question, usually more than one person has a question. This is why it's very important to have the courage to speak up, because not everyone will. But if you do speak up, then you can get the answer and everyone else can share. And you can have a piece of that, a part in bringing that out for others through your faith. So the question was about long-term goals, especially for young children. And in particular, this thread of the email, this step in the thread, she's talking about how to bring long-term goals into the practical. And so she says it kind of sounds like what you're saying is that all of these options reduce down to establish the most functional homestead you can and then see where the world goes after that. And she's kind of being tongue-in-cheek. But she's like, look, how do you balance, this is the formulation of the question, she didn't write it this way, how do you balance what we know about the end times and what we do right now? So the world as it is right now versus as it will be. How do you optimize over time is really what she's asking, knowing that the conditions are going to change significantly. And one reason I'd rather answer this with a video is because actually just yesterday I had a brief exchange with someone who has older children who are still at home but ready to get kicked out of the nest. And he was asking, he's a father, he was asking about specific careers he might encourage his children to go into. And he had thought about his own career, and he was asking me my opinion on mine. And I have said, and you've heard me say this on this channel, I wouldn't necessarily steer a child towards the technological fields as far as coding, for example. And so this lady, she asks, why are you having your kids study tech and design if the economy wherein those skills would be useful is near collapse? Isn't this futile? And this is where we all have to elevate to a higher level of thinking. I'm not saying this person is not bright. Her and her husband both are delightful to speak with, precisely because they are thinkers. But in general, just speaking generally now, we need to elevate to a higher level of rational thought, because in a complex system, there is no general solution. The greater the complexity, the more specialization is required. And there are all sorts of properties that come in with that, including the fact that the more specialized the solution, the more temporary it's going to be. And that's a real bitter pill. That's to say, well, maybe today you need, I'm not saying this is true, but suppose you could have created some life-changing machine, the cotton gin, without any kind of formal education at all. I don't know that that was the case, but whereas today, if you want to make the next improvement on some space shuttle, well, you're going to have a PhD in physics plus a bunch of other things. And a lot of aptitude on top of that. That's all specialization. And the things that make you really good at that necessarily make you less good at other things in a complex system. Do you understand that? So if you're the whiz-bang best person ever at memorizing definitions of words, you will necessarily be pretty terrible at other things, because the kind of person you have to be really good at memorizing words makes you terrible at other things. God is optimized to all things. And this is one of the barriers. He can't make himself known to everyone in equal ways, because they would learn things about him that they're not willing to believe. That might be a shocker to you. He's not optimized to specific things. He's optimized to all things. And he's optimized through all time and eternity, not here and now. Anyway, not to go too deep off the end there. So there's a huge difference between two young boys living in a house where their father has a PhD in computer science, was a tenured computer science professor, and has a multitude of experience at all levels of software engineering in the professional space. And someone who's 23 has never really done anything difficult in their entire lives and is just sort of flailing around life, living in their parents' basement with no clue as to what to do and no real strong reason to do anything. So what's optimal for one of those people is very different than what's optimal for another. Do you understand that? It's like I say, I can't think of a good reason for anyone to join the military today, but there may well be a person in a situation where that's exactly the best thing they can do. Is it best in the universal sense? So now actually we're dovetailing into another gospel principle that no one understands or would believe, and that is that what is good depends on the situation. It turns out. What is optimal depends on the circumstances. And so when you change one of those circumstances, you have to change what the best thing is. So with this father yesterday, he said, hey, here's the situation on one of my sons. Do you think he should get into coding? Because I thought that'd be a good idea. No, I don't, because I don't think he can hack it. Because if he could hack it, he would have shown evidence of that in other ways in his life. And it happens to be a really hard thing. So either you're naturally really smart, which was not the case for me, or you just will work like a son of a gun to figure it out. And it's a million times easier to figure out today with all the free resources and tools. And what I had, I just had a book, and good luck. I mean, we didn't even really have people we could go to, and I had to go to college for it, et cetera, and you just sort of had to figure it out back then. There wasn't Google, believe it or not. We just had the earliest search engines, and there just wasn't any content out there to help with this. So it's just a wing and a prayer. So you had to be really determined or just super smart. And I was really determined. So nowadays you don't really have to be so determined, but it's a heck of a lot harder than a million other things you could do. And there are many difficult things out there. Programming's it's not uniquely difficult. There are several things out there that are quite similar as far as the challenges they provide. The benefits are not as great, but anyway. So it just depends. And we're broaching multiple topics here, but what you know your kids, and if they're little babies still, you still know something about them because kids come with an awful lot of personality. But you can change the plan. If right now all you have to go off of is what's the generically best thing for a generic kid in the circumstances I know that we provide as parents. Great, go with that. And as you learn more, change the plan. Right? So I have one son who has an aptitude for art, and it wasn't clear that he had an aptitude for art for the first 8 years of his life, maybe. So plans change as things develop, as kids develop, as people develop, So, and then the other thing I want to highlight that I've already mentioned, but just to draw an underscore under it, is over time. And you do need to think, well, what if the end of the world comes tomorrow? It's not going to, any more than it has today. What if the end of the world is in a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, even after you die, however long that's going to take? You need to think about all those things, and then you can either go all in on an assumption, a specific assumption, or you can generalize over all of them. the wonderful thing about God's paths is that they provide multiple benefits. And so as we aim, we ought to replicate that as much as we can. So there's no broad brush swipe that's good for everybody, except to say point to God as best you can. That is the only answer. But as far as specifics go, there are details that are going to vary from person to person. You have to go for what yields the greatest impact in your case. And like I said to the guy yesterday, I said, one set of people for whom I think programming would be good generic advice for a career would be people who just don't push that hard into life, but they push hard enough into life that they can figure out how to code. And that maybe is a more razor-thin margin than one would expect. But there's a minimum threshold and a max threshold. And so on the minimum threshold, as I've already explained a little, it's hard enough that you need to push yourself pretty hard to figure it out. And more than anything, it takes a degree of courage to be a good programmer that I see in very few programmers. That's the number one failing I see in programmers, is a lack of courage. They'll code all around what they really have to do because they're scared. And I've never been in a situation where I've managed to figure out how to help a developer be more courageous, significantly more courageous. They've all moved on the needle, but just not by very much. And I've met people that are way better developers than me by nature. They have inherent gifts for that. But I have never met anyone who has more courage than me, except Jesus. And so the secret to me being able to code circles around other people, when that's been the case, I would boil it down to my courage, because I'll stare right into the abyss until it lights up. And that's a property that is very difficult to instill in someone. But anyway, if you push hard enough to be successful at something like that, then you have to stay in this sweet spot. And I know multiple professionals across various fields that have that same threshold to get into it and be successful, who have no doubt felt this same thing. As you push into it with your whole weight, the only way you can justify that is by presuming that it is going to fulfill massive quantities of meaning in your life. And so you push into it with all of your might, and you happen to be willing to push into it a lot harder than normal people would. But you reach the end of the sweet spot where it can no longer support the hope you place into it. And one reason I'm going into such depth with this, because it's true of life in general. It's just that programming and some other fields happen to replicate that property enough that you could learn it in that specific slice of life. But this is absolutely the case for life in general. And once you hit the end of it, you've got a real problem on your hands, because power comes through sincerity. And once you've reached the limit of meaning in your field, and you've done everything that one can do in it, you're in big trouble, because you now don't have something that can sufficiently hold your hope. And so you better have something else in your life that does, or else you're going to go through a massive ego death. And I smile. It's a horrific thing. It's not funny at all, but I smile because just like you'd smile at the wedding of two people who are rather innocent in life, and they think that they're getting into something that's very different than what they are getting into, and you know what awaits them. So, yeah, the world is going to end, and all sorts of things in the economy are going to collapse, and in society in general. And if that, none of that means that it's not good to do something that can't roll right into that, because otherwise you're just going to have to go live in the woods somewhere as a vagabond. And I don't know that that's going to do anyone any good, or any legal way of doing that. I'm not aware of one. I've looked. So what your path is between now and then, though, yeah, you should look for things that you can do that provide you a mix of what's useful for now. Whether that be purely money, which there are worse things to think about maximizing, or some measure of character development, which doing something that's difficult and tedious is certainly useful there. But there are much deeper things as well. Being able to do a job where you sincerely feel like you're contributing to the benefit of the world, that's a massively powerful motivator. And if you are getting into a field where given your personality traits, you're going to hit a wall and just it's going to seem totally empty to you, and that's going to happen 2 years in, and it's something that took you 4 years to learn and train for, that's not fun, right? But then there's a whole host of situations in life where you will learn things from them that will cause you to say, I would never do this again. And yet you have to acknowledge that it was the only way you could have learned those things. So it's super complicated. And you got to think about this and balance the need to think about it with resisting overthinking it, and just kind of go at it. The good and bad news is that the state of affairs is such that I mentioned how there's no general solution to this problem. Also, for individual people, it's going to be increasingly unlikely that you're ever just going to do one thing. One of the reasons society is guaranteed to collapse is because in a complex system, you have to over-specialize. But in a complex system, over-specialization guarantees that you will suddenly find yourself with way fewer opportunities to do what it is you're good at. Or it won't be worth anything anymore. Suddenly. I don't know if that made sense. So to keep the thing going, you have to hyper-specialize. But in hyper-specializing, you're guaranteeing your own... what's the word? When you suddenly become useless. I can't remember the word now. I keep thinking redundancy. That's not it. Futility. That's not it. You guarantee your own obsolescence. You guarantee your own obsolescence. And that's not fun, right? Because then, so imagine you're an anesthesiologist. I'm just plucking this out of thin air. You've trained, you've competed your butt off to get into the several schools where you had to do this. You got into med school, and then you got into your residency. And so you've been at the head of the pack across multiple thresholds to keep going. Now you're finally out of school. Let's say it takes you time to pay off your debt, which you almost guaranteed accrued in going through all that. You're fighting against your malpractice insurance premiums. And you get through all this where you're finally making the money that justified the sacrifice for you to get there. And something suddenly changes. Let's say the benevolent government says we're putting a hard cap on all anesthesiologists, and they're all just going to make 10% of what they do right now. And you say, I never ever would have done that if I thought that would be the end. And now you've just wasted how many years of your life doing way more than any other person does. That no normal person gets through those gates, works their butt off, doesn't sleep for like 10 years or whatever. and the carpet's yanked from under you right when you got to the payoff point. So if you think that those sorts of things are going to happen, does it make sense to do those sorts of things in terms of the sacrifice to get there? Probably not. Probably not. Would I go into the medical field today? Heck no. No, I would not. No, I would not. Does that mean that it's a bad idea for anyone to go into? No. Given their circumstances, personality, etc., maybe it's the best thing that fits all those criteria. And looking at that, so if I was advising particular people and I knew them, I'd say, well, look, to be truthful, it'd be way better for you to do this thing. But let's be honest, you're kind of lazy and you'd never succeed at this particular thing, or whatever it is. You're kind of a coward, so you'd never succeed at this particular thing. So the choice before you is this. Do you want to change in a fundamental way to become courageous or intelligent or, thoughtful, patient, whatever, to be able to do this? Or do you want to really stay basically the same, in which case the best thing for you is join the military or whatever? And that's the way I would go with that. And then to rehash briefly, and then we'll close this up. Again, if someone's super young, well, you've got a lot of options. And learning something like programming, geez, it costs you nothing because you'll find resources online that are at least as good as anything you'd encounter paying for a degree. And they're free. Now, that doesn't work if you're a lazy bum. But if you're motivated and or you have someone to help you get motivated, or at least someone to help you believe that you can do it, and you're 12, go for it, man. What else are you going to do? Play Minecraft? And then at least you have that to fall back on. If nothing else, you could do this for a living, and it beats flipping burgers. Right? So that's the idea. I hope that helps. And now maybe it makes more sense when I say parents should architect their children's lives, and you should start as young as you can. And by the way, this is really hard to do if you're in public school, but it's another benefit for homeschooling. All these things converge. It's not about the particulars. It's about the big picture and then working backwards from that. So this is way longer than I intended, but I hope that addresses the questions of both people who this is addressed to, and that this finds you if you're one of the many who I know have the same questions. So